Down here in Spalding Bight area, all this area back in here again with our water levels that are fluctuating and doing their things. We've got some not too terribly bad as far as the our tides go, but there's been, like I say, some lower tide days. We've been able to fish some of this flat out here in front of these mouths. Of course, what I like to do on these, or I like to get up in these back lake mouths, is get in these guts and fish those all the way back up into the lakes back in there. But you can wade all these mouths that are in here because you got nice little deep guts and cuts that are through here. And when you have water that drops out on you, or if you're trying to get a little protection, you can get back up in those, whether you're wading it or if you're trying to fish it from a boat. It'll help with that. And this whole shoreline, you've got little back lake mouths that dump out there. You've got wadable guts that you can get back up into. And the thing about that, when you fish those this time of year, especially when the tide does really drop out, we do have a negative tide, so those fish will get in those areas and they will congregate. They will get themselves all bunched up in these areas like that. So what you can do is, if you have an area that's got multiple guts or mouths that lead back up into lakes somewhere, and what you can do is just sit there and you can work those. If you find some fish in one of them, just kind of hang there and see if you can't find some better fish there. If you don't find any fish after you give it, a legitimate amount of time, move on to the next gut. And providing there's nobody that's already sitting there in that location, you can move on to that. You'll find your fish in one of those particular back lake mouths like that, like here in Sherman's. You got this nice little gut that's all back up in here. Of course, if you've got the right amount of water, this is a great topwater back lake. We like to work this back shoreline. We like to work on this bayside shoreline based on what our wind is, where we're going to start at. But primarily right now that water's been around calf deep, maybe knee deep, which isn't bad. But the grass that's in there is pretty high, so sometimes that grass is laid over, even though there's a decent amount of water to fish it. But sometimes it makes it difficult to do that. Then, of course, we've just kind of worked on around the Jaybird and worked those mouths that are there in these back lakes here, and then ultimately ended up down in Paul's Mott, or vice versa if you want to start at Mott and then work down to Spalding. That's fine. Either way, just it kind of really depends. Your wind's going to dictate to you what you need to do or how you want to go about it. But again, you got this whole shoreline up here that's got lots of back lake opportunities and mouths that dump and that get out into it. One of the things that we've taken advantage of is this bar that's out here in Long Reef Bend, and get on the outer edge of it. Because again, our water temps, when we're getting midday, they're touching 70, which is very comfortable for these fish. And when you grab your fish, if you got them by hand, you can tell they're not cold. So they're very comfortable in the water right now. And you can probably tell you're not layered up much in your waders either, because the water temps are just not chilly. So, and that's going to be, looks like for the foreseeable future, that's going to be the same kind of pattern over the next several days. So that's why it's always important to pay attention to that. But we just kind of work these areas like that, work the grass line, work the potholes, work the points, work all this area up and down this way. Like I say, this whole shoreline from the Mott all the way down to Spalding, you can spend several days working up and down that shoreline and not cover it all. So, if there's a section of it that you like, that you want to work, that you want to try to get after it, man, you can spend several hours up and down this particular shoreline, whether it be in the Mott, whether it be from Jaybird Point, whether it be the Sherman's area, whether it be down in the Spalding Bight area. You can spend a day in there with not a problem. If your majors and minors lined up to where you get two of them in a fishing day, yeah, you could do that easily with not a problem. With that, like I say, with the new moon that's coming right there, there's going to be some opportunities for that to potentially take place. So just make sure you take care of your salunier tables and watching that. Again, the same baits that what I mentioned in the last video have been the same working in this area. Not one particular thing has really stood out to us. And the one thing I can add to that is even top water. We've thrown some top water in some of these areas, and it's been pretty good. Like I say, nothing's been knocking it out of the park. Soft dines, Miradines, or a couple other baits that we've kind of thrown in there as well that's done pretty well for us if you have the right amount of water and you can control the descent on those. They're great. That's what makes the Double D so good, is that's an ascending bait. So you can really work that down into, say, some thigh deep water, and you can work it over some deeper grass beds and allow that bait to come up out of there without getting hung up in grass or even floating grass for that aspect of it. But anyway, that said, this whole shoreline has been pretty good for us. It's not like there's been just stacks and stacks of fish that are up and down it, but you're locating your fish. You know, the majority of the trout that we're catching are in the 14 to 18 size redfish. Again, in that 16 to 22 on average. And every once in a while we'll get one out of there that's a little bit bigger than that. But for the most part, that's the redfish size that we're catching. So if that's the things you like to target, that'll be a great area. And again, with flounder season back open, and remember, duck hunters are still out as well. So duck season is still going. So make sure that you got alternate locations that you can fish if you need to. Over here in St. Charles Bay, of course, you can get right there at this little 2-hole boat ramp that's there in St. Charles and run straight across over here to the east shore if you want and fish all that whole shoreline that sets up all the way up to Egg Point. Depending on what kind of winds you've got, so we've had a variety of winds this past week. We've had them coming out of the north, northwest, west, southwest, south, southeast. It's kind of been everywhere. So based on what you've got with that, if you're in this particular estuary on any given day, check what your wind is, and that way you can set up where you need to be to stay protected, especially if it's if it's a big heavy wind that's coming. If not, we hadn't had anything that's been significant as far as heavy wind. Maybe we may have had some gust up to 15 on a particular day, but all that's fine. You can fish all that. It's very comfortable to fish. It's very easy to fish, very manageable. And sometimes those wind-blown shorelines are very good. They can really produce some fish for you. But we've just been working this all the way up to, like I say, Egg Point's been good, all that around there on the inside. And then, of course, you get on the backside like you head over to Boy Scout camp, all back down there, Little Devil Bayou, Big Devil Bayou, Cavasso Creek, even all the way to the very back of St. Charles, where the lakes, some few lakes that dump off back into there. The one thing that I've said in the past, and I'll say it again, if you're going to wade that particular area at the very back of St. Charles, just understand that you're going to get into some very deep mud, very soft mud. It's manageable from the standpoint it's not sticky that you can put yourself in trouble. But I would, depending on what your skill set is and your physical abilities, you may or may not want to contend with that. But, there's going to be some knee deep, even thigh deep in some spots. But if you can deal with that, you give yourself opportunity to find you some redfish back in there and potentially some good trout back in those areas. So just something to keep in mind if you're going to fish that far back into St. Charles. St. Charles got a lot of good areas this time of year that really open up to wintertime fishing. Now, I will say this, since we have had temperatures that have been hovering back in the mid-70s to touching 80, water temps have been, 71, 72 degrees in certain areas. So, and we have seen one of those alligators and big lizards back in there every once in a while. They'll be laying out in the water. So they've kind of moved themselves back out a little bit. So that's something to just be aware of. Just keep that in the back of your brain. Just understand that that's potentially there. Now, once that water gets, if it stays consistently in those lower 60s, you're not going to have to worry about them. But, once it starts getting back up in those 70s, they kind of want to ease out in that water and just kind of test it, so to speak. But anyway, it hasn't been anything that's been a major problem by any stretch of the imagination. So rest easy on that. Just be aware. That's what you need to do. Just be aware. Cavasso Creek's been good for us. We found redfish and trout that are up in there. Nothing of great size. Just good numbers. If you're looking for some box fish, great area to get back in there, whether you want to work your plastics, whether you want to work topwater, your corkies, your down south, whatever you want to go with has been fine. And then, of course, back around here to Cow Chip and this shoreline that comes all the way back into here has been pretty good. And it kind of depends on your day, too. Like I say, all these areas that I'm listing or talking about, they have produced fish for us, but not necessarily every time. We may have had to jump 2 or 3 spots before we've located and found our fish that we needed or that we wanted anyway. So, you can find the dinks just about anywhere. But if you're looking for a particular fish, then you may have to move around a little bit. Or if you're fortunate enough, you can knock one out on your first wade, depending on where you start. You get back around here as you come back toward the Big Tree Road. You got all the shell that they've got stacked in here at CCA and Texas Parks and Wildlife has put into this area here. You can locate some fish around that. It's a good wading area. And then, of course, this whole shoreline out in front of the Hunt Club back toward the boat ramp, all back down this way here. It's another one of those good little areas that you've got a nice little edge, got grass, got everything that you want that works in that area. So just keep all that stuff in mind. Again, the same baits that I mentioned earlier, it's the same things we've been doing in all these estuaries. Just pay attention what your water clarity are, and then trying to transverse over to a more translucent bait as opposed to darker color baits. But again, a variety of colors in your box will do you or carry you a long way and do you a favor by doing yourself that way. So anyway, again, majors and minors, and be safe out on the water. Up here in Sundown, we've been fishing this whole back shoreline, and just kind of working that with our water levels being what they are. They're fluctuating. Now, of course, it's pretty standard this time of year. We've got normal, what I would have considered normal water levels that are in here right now. So you can work all this back shoreline pretty easily. You can work out in the middle pretty easily. Water temps are still hovering around the upper 60s, 67 to 70, depending on where you're at. A lot of structure that's in here. You got mud, you got shale, you got a little grass that's mixed in there. And primarily, the main things that we have located back here off this back shoreline, or even past that little ICW island that's on this other side over here, has been redfish. The reds have been pretty good in that area. Just not super big numbers, but we've caught them anywhere from 16 inches all the way up to 27 inches. So there's been quite a difference of redfish that's been up and down this back shoreline, or been out on the bay side of it, been close to that. So one of those things you just have to kind of be aware of. And then, of course, the Sundown, it's very much tide predicated. So really important, if you want to fish this particular area and target that, then you really need to make sure that you watch your tides and what they are. So we haven't had any negative tides in a couple of weeks, but we've had some pretty low ones that would be a little difficult if you didn't have the right kind of boat to get back in there to work these areas. And it's been, like I say, it's been moderately good. Looking at the long range 10-day forecast, there's not a lot of big weather that's pushing down. Still don't have a significant cold front. We may have some cooler mornings, but nothing's just where it's just going to stay in the 40s for several days. It's just not happened yet. So at some point we will get that, whether it be here at the end of December, headed into the new year. And speaking of, I'd like to wish everybody a happy new year, and hope you had a very Merry Christmas on top of that. And hopefully you'll have an opportunity to get out on the water in this upcoming week to celebrate the new year. It's always a cool way to do that. But that said, like I say, we're working this back shoreline, we're working the grass line edge of that, and we're throwing lots of different baits. Nothing has been really stood out that's been just knock it out of the park great, like, okay, get this right here, and this is what you need to throw primarily. No, we've been pretty versatile on what we've been throwing. We've been throwing the down south and the burner shad, the original size, and the big smooth, the supermodel. All four of those sizes, we're going to be here in that not the big moon, but the new moon, which is my favorite time frame to fish. So that will be in place. Then you got your mirror lures, Little Johns, Little John XLs have been good. The Corkies have been good. Whatever variation that you like, whether it be Fat Boy, sinkers, whatever. My personal favorites are the originals and the Devil. So that's the two that I'd throw. Of course, I have plenty of clients that will throw the sinkers and the floaters, which are just fine. Double D has been good. All those different flavors like Knock and Tail has been good. Marker 54, the jerk shrimp, and their paddle tails have been good. So there's been not really one particular thing that's been just, okay, we're just going to stay with this and do it. Everybody's had something a little bit different on, and everybody's caught fish with a particular bait. So that said, just make sure that you have a variation in your box, and that way that you can really kind of expand it there. Because, like I say, we're kind of going into a stabilized weather pattern here over the next several days. So you may have some cooler mornings that may be in the 50s, upper 50s, low 60s or something, but then looks like it's rebounding all back up into the upper 70s, touching 80s the last couple of days. So with that said, just always keep that in mind. Make sure you always keep an eyeball on that weather pattern, what's going on. Majors and minors have been our main thing that we focused on, as always. This time of year is really great for the artificial game, those fish. But the one thing that, again, this kind of a double-edged sword for us is that since we have not had a big, super hard cold front to push in here yet. We still have lots of bait in our system. Plenty of bait still working around. So we're still kind of competing with that. Usually we've already had a few good cold fronts, and all that bait, other than just what's residual, is still in here. And then, the artificial game really ramps up, but we're still kind of battling against what's the amount of bait that's still in our system. So that's made things a little bit difficult on any particular given day, but not a consistency thing. Because we're still catching fish on the artificial with not a problem, but some days are a little bit more difficult than others based on the fact that we have still lots of bait in our system. So with that said, just make sure you got a good game plan in place, and you do that your due diligence, and make sure that you stay safe out there heading into this new year.